This video is different to the videos I usually publish. It's my first opinion piece. You could also call it a commentary video. It's also the first video where I wrote a script, although I'm probably going to deviate from that script as I usually like to talk freely. What I wanted to do today is comment on the recent changes in the business model of the Unity game development engine and the potential implications this change has for higher education. I wanted to do that from my perspective as an educator who has been in the game design space for quite some time. And before I get started, I need to make perfectly clear that this is my personal opinion. This is not an official statement from a university, college, department, or program. If you're new to my channel, I usually publish tutorial-style videos about digital media, game design, and spatial audio with a strong emphasis on the latter, even though some of my most successful tutorials have been Unity tutorials. What is lesser known is that my day job is managing an academic unit in a research-intensive university with a strong emphasis on experiential learning. One of the programs under my direct supervision is a game design program. We're actually quite well known for that. We are one of the top game design programs in the United States. And I therefore feel that I have a reasonably good understanding about the situation. Educational institutions that have either a career focus or a strong focus on experiential learning, like we do, need to teach the students the practical skills necessary in order to be successful in their respective industries. And this obviously includes how to work with particular pieces of software. In such an environment, unanticipated changes in licensing policies can have profound effects on educational strategies. It is not unheard of that an academic program needed to change their curricular structure because of a change of a business model of one of their software developers. To give an example, when Adobe changed their licensing model to subscription only, they originally did not provide a viable licensing model for academic institutions. And as a result of that, the licensing costs of Adobe software for academic institutions would have skyrocketed. In our case, to hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, even though we are a relatively small program. At that time, we had multiple courses in our curriculum that required the use of Adobe software, and because we didn't quite know if we could purchase the license again, we decided to simply remove those courses and replace them with courses that are software agnostic, meaning that students can choose whatever software they want as long as it provides the proper functionality. It's obviously not only Photoshop that you can use in order to edit images. There are other options out there as well, and they work just as fine. And students could choose whatever they wanted to, as long as it was sufficient to complete their assignments. To be fair, Adobe turned the ship around in the 11th hour, and they are now providing licensing options for students and teachers that are actually quite feasible. However, by the time they did that, we had already implemented our changes. And as a result of that, students now no longer need to use Adobe software if they don't want to. You would think that software developers have a very strong interest in making sure that academic institutions are using their software. After all, if students use their software during the college years, it's very likely that they're going to continue to use that software during their professional careers. However, surprisingly, this is not always the case. And I can only speculate, but I personally think that has to do with the fact that any changes they make in educational strategies has a delayed effect on their returns. In the case of Adobe, they made their changes years ago. However, we have only recently started to see students who graduate from our programs without ever having touched any piece of Adobe software. If a company is disrupting the educational use of their products, the result is usually not seen until maybe half a decade later. And in a time where managers are primarily interested in short-term gains, long-term goals of companies quite often fall under the table. Now, the situation around Unity is not as extreme as it used to be with Adobe. However, it does share some similarities. In this video, I'm not going to talk too much about what changes Unity actually decided to implement. Many others have commented on that. I'm going to leave a couple of links in the description below. I encourage you to watch those videos. They're really interesting. The very short TLDR is that Unity decided to charge developers an additional runtime fee, which is based on the number of installations of a game. And there are many nuances to that. If you have not already done so, I encourage you to read through the material that Unity published. It's very interesting, and it has turned out to be extremely controversial. But there are many issues with this runtime fee, and many of these issues are very specific to independent game developers. And there has been a very healthy discussion about the problems that arise from this particular change in licensing policy. What I wanted to address today, however, is that this change also has a number of unintended consequences for higher education. First and foremost, at the time I'm recording this, it is still very unclear about how exactly Unity plans to track the number of game installations. In one of the forums, they actually write the following: we leverage our own proprietary data model. We believe it gives an accurate determination of the number of times the runtime is distributed for a given project. It appears somewhat strange that a company would implement a business model that estimates the pricing of their products based on some black box data model that is invisible to their clients. As others have pointed out before me, it is essentially like Unity saying, hey developers, our computer system told us that you owe us $20,000. We are not really allowed to tell you how we came up with that number, but trust us, it's the correct one. As it stands now, this runtime fee does not apply to educational institutions, and there's also no reason to believe that it ever will. However, it's not necessarily the fee that is the problem. It's more the lack of clarity about how Unity actually collects the data necessary in order to calculate that fee. Because we don't really know how to track the number of installs, we need to assume that they somehow have a way to identify whether or not Unity or the runtime of Unity is installed on a particular system. That could be, for example, by the system calling home or some other form of communication between the system where the runtime is installed and Unity. Now, universities have extremely strict rules when it comes to information security and privacy for very obvious reasons. And the fact that Unity might have a way to actually track the use of their Unity runtime within an educational context is very troubling and concerning. Our students are using the Unity runtime during their playtesting for class projects, for example. And if Unity is really able to track the number of installs, they're technically able to track how our students progress in their classes. They can track how often they playtest, they can track with many people they playtest, they can track all these things that they're actually not allowed to track. Now, I do not think that that's actually what they're doing. However, because they are not clear about how that actually works, I, as somebody who is responsible for quite a few game design students, have to assume that this is exactly what they're doing. I would not be surprised at all if we would have to reevaluate Unity again in order to make sure that it is in compliance with security and privacy regulations, and this can be a somewhat lengthy process. The second issue arises from the fee itself. It is important to point out that in today's academic world, it is not uncommon that students are taking a class project and using that as a basis to start up their own independent game development studio. And while I do not have any exact data, at least not at the moment, we are very certain that we have a number of student-led teams that ended up creating a startup which is now subject to this runtime fee. This obviously has consequences on how we need to advise our students in the selection of the optimal game engine for their student projects. Now, to be perfectly clear, I do not question the validity of a game engine developer to charge for the game engine. If you are a developer of a game and your game is very successful, obviously you need to pay a fee to the game engine that you used in order to create that game. However, the problem really is in this very weird runtime fee. It's intended and unintended consequences, the lack of transparency on how that fee is calculated, and quite frankly, the apparent lack of Unity to understand their customer base. In our program, we used to exclusively use Unity. When I started in 2012, this is all we did. Everything was Unity. I believe this is no longer really an option given how unclear and unpredictable the monetization strategy of Unity has become. What we probably need to do, and I think many institutions will do the same, is that we need to switch to a model that is game engine agnostic, meaning that students will be able to choose whatever game engine they want to use. If it's Unreal, it's Unreal. If it's Unity, it's Unity. If it's Godot, it's Godot. Now, to be perfectly fair, this process towards a game engine agnostic approach in game design education was already underway anyway, at least in our case. This was mainly driven by the fact that there have been such big developments in the Unreal game engine and the fact that Unreal and Unity have started to target completely different market segments. But it is no question that what happened this week accelerated that process significantly. So what's my conclusion? Well, there has been a lot of drama this week, and while much of this drama isn't really that justified, some of it is, especially around the issues of trust. Unity definitely lost a lot of trust among the developer community and also among higher education professionals. I do not expect that Unity will disappear. This is not going to happen, but it will make us think twice if we recommend Unity to our students, and this will definitely have an impact on the use of Unity in the future. But I would like to leave you with a comment by somebody who might be the greatest philosopher of our time. I am, of course, talking about Asmongold, and he recently stated the following.
Yeah, exactly. Like, trust us, we have a proprietary system that will make sure that nothing goes wrong. Well, can we see it? No. Can you at least give us an idea? No. Is it exact or an estimate? It's whatever. How can anybody trust that shit?
Exactly. See you at the next video.